I remember the exact moment my world collapsed. The weight of my phone felt heavier than usual in my palm as I stared at the notification. A simple tag on social media, innocent to anyone else, but it was like seeing a ghost. My girlfriend Elise tagged at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel downtown at 2:37 p.m. on a Tuesday. A Tuesday when she was supposed to be giving a presentation in Sacramento. I sat in my office, the ambient noise of keyboards and distant conversations suddenly muted as I zoomed in on the photo. It wasn't even her post, just a friend of a friend who tagged her in the background of a business lunch. There she was, her chestnut hair cascading down her back, leaning close to someone I couldn't quite see. But I knew she wasn't supposed to be there. I knew she was supposed to be 3 hours away. That's how it starts, isn't it? Not with dramatic confrontations or lipstick on collars, just a small inconsistency. A tiny thread that, when pulled, unravels everything you thought was real. Elise and I had been together for 4 years. 4 years of building a life, of weekend getaways and lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and crosswords. 4 years of planning a future. The house with the wraparound porch, the golden retriever, the kids with her eyes and my stubborn chin. 4 years of me believing I'd found the person I would grow old with. I didn't confront her immediately. Something held me back. Maybe the same instinct that makes wounded animals crawl away to lick their wounds in private. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to hear her lie to my face. Instead, I watched. I cataloged. I became a historian of my own relationship's downfall. The late client dinners that left no email trails. The weekends at marketing conferences with suspiciously few professional photos. The sudden password changes on her phone because of work security protocols. All these things I'd accepted with the blind trust of someone who believes love means never having to question. But that Tuesday afternoon, as I stared at the undeniable evidence of her presence in a hotel she had no reason to be in, I finally allowed myself to question everything. I called my assistant and canceled my meetings for the afternoon, mumbling something about food poisoning. As I drove downtown, my hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. The logical part of my brain, the part that had built my financial consulting firm from nothing, tried to generate innocent explanations. Maybe her Sacramento trip was canceled. Maybe she was meeting a client who was staying at the hotel. Maybe. But the rest of me knew. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel stood like a gleaming monolith of glass and steel in the heart of downtown. It was one of those places with doormen in tailored uniforms and a lobby full of people pretending not to notice how expensive everything was. Elise and I had stayed there once, for our second anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. I valeted my car and walked into the lobby with the confident stride of someone who belonged there, even as I felt like an imposter in my own life. The marble floors echoed beneath my shoes as I approached the bar. A wood-paneled affair with dim lighting and overpriced whiskey. That's where I saw them. They were seated in a corner booth, partially hidden by a decorative pillar. Elise was wearing the blue dress I'd given her for her birthday, her hand resting casually on the arm of a man I recognized immediately. Jason Mercer, her boss. The same boss she'd described as brilliant but impossible. The same boss she'd stayed late for countless times over the past few months. They weren't just talking. They were existing in that intimate bubble that new lovers create. Foreheads almost touching, matching smiles, fingers intertwined on the table. I watched as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so tender and familiar that it made me physically ill. I stood frozen, a statue among the moving bodies of hotel guests and staff. Part of me wanted to march over there, to create the scene this betrayal deserved, to flip their table and demand answers, to let everyone in that polished bar witness the destruction of what I thought was an unbreakable bond. But I didn't. Instead, I turned and walked out, the cool afternoon air hitting my face like a slap. I made it to my car before the first tear fell, then another, and another, until I was sitting in the driver's seat of my BMW, sobbing like a child, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. The valet pretended not to notice when he knocked on my window to give me my ticket. I thanked him with a voice that didn't sound like my own and drove home on autopilot. The world around me blurred not just by tears, but by the sudden realization that the future I'd planned no longer existed. Our apartment, my apartment now I supposed, felt different when I returned. Like a museum exhibit of a life that no longer functioned. Photos of us on vacations, at friends' weddings, celebrating holidays. All of them lies captured in glossy paper. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat on our balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed offensively beautiful given the circumstances. My phone buzzed with a text from Elise. presentation went great. Having dinner with the team, then heading to the hotel. Miss you. Don't wait up. Oh, ooh. I stared at the heart emoji until it seemed to pulse with malice. Another lie so casually delivered. How many others had there been? How long had I been the fool in this narrative? I didn't respond. Instead, I finished my drink and poured another, and another. By midnight, the bottle was half empty, and I had moved from sadness to anger to a cold, calculating clarity that would have frightened me under different circumstances. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk, illuminated by the blue light of my computer screen, and I started planning. Not just a confrontation, anyone could do that. Not just a breakup, that was inevitable now. No, I started planning something bigger. Something worthy of the magnitude of this betrayal, because the truth was, I could have forgiven a moment of weakness. A drunken mistake, even a brief affair followed by genuine remorse. But this calculated deception, this double life, this deserved more than just my walking away. As dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows through the blinds, I had the beginning of a plan. It would take time. It would take money, a lot of it. It would require patience and strategy, and a kind of cold-heartedness I wasn't sure I possessed. But as I heard Elise's key in the lock, as I listened to her quietly set down her bags and slip off her shoes, as I pictured her washing away the evidence of her betrayal before she crawled into bed beside me, I knew I could do it. I closed my laptop, went to our bedroom, and slid under the covers, turning my back to her side of the bed. When she came in minutes later, smelling of hotel soap and lies, I pretended to be asleep. "James," she whispered, her hand gently touching my shoulder. I didn't respond. I couldn't trust myself to speak yet, not until I was sure I could maintain the facade of ignorance that my plan required. She sighed and settled into bed, maintaining a respectful distance between us. Even in betrayal, she was considerate of my sleep. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Tomorrow I would begin. Tomorrow I would start the long game. Tomorrow I would set in motion a plan that would eventually lead me to own the very hotel where my girlfriend betrayed me, and to ban her from it for life. But tonight, I just needed to survive the proximity of her body without breaking down or breaking character. So I measured my breathing, counted ceiling tiles, and waited for morning with the patience of a man who knew that revenge, like the best investments, appreciates with time. The next morning, I performed the role of unsuspecting boyfriend with an actor's precision. I kissed Elise goodbye as she left for work, asked about her presentation, with just the right amount of casual interest, and promised to pick up dinner on my way home. All while something inside me had hardened into a resolve I'd never felt before. Once alone, I began my research. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel, I discovered, was part of a boutique chain owned by Westbrook Hospitality Group. Their portfolio included 7 luxury properties across the country, with the downtown location being their flagship. Current estimated value, approximately $112 million. I laughed bitterly at my computer screen. Even with my firm's success, I wasn't in the $100 million club. Not yet, anyway. But as I dug deeper, I found something interesting. Westbrook was privately held, and rumor had it that the aging founder, Theodore Westbrook, was considering selling off properties individually rather than the entire group at once. The hotel market had been volatile since the pandemic, and boutique luxury properties were particularly vulnerable. I made a few calls to contacts in commercial real estate and investment banking, carefully framing my questions as general market research. By noon, I had confirmation. The Grand Metropolitan was indeed potentially for sale, though not publicly listed. The asking price was steep, but not entirely out of reach if I leveraged everything I had and brought in investors. For the first time since seeing Elise with Jason, I felt a spark of something other than despair. It wasn't happiness, I was nowhere near that emotion, but it was purpose, direction, a North Star in the darkness. I spent the next week in a strange double life of my own. During the day, I ran my firm with a newfound intensity that my employees noticed but didn't question. During stolen moments between meetings, I researched hotel operations, ownership structures, and the specific challenges of the luxury hospitality market. At night, I played the role of loving boyfriend while gathering evidence of Elise's affair. I installed a tracking app on her phone under the guise of a security update from my company's IT department. I noted the patterns of her late meetings and business trips. I even befriended the receptionist at her advertising firm, who unwittingly confirmed that Jason Mercer was often out of office at the same times as Elise. Each new piece of evidence was both vindicating and devastating. I was right, the affair had been going on for months. But being right had never felt so hollow. 2 weeks after my discovery, I had my first meeting with a potential investment partner. Marcus Chen had been a client of my firm for years, and his venture capital background made him the perfect first step in my plan. A hotel? Marcus raised an eyebrow over his espresso. We were meeting at a cafe far from my usual haunts, just in case. That's quite a departure from your usual investments, James. I had prepared for this question with a response that was both logical and just true enough to be convincing. Diversification, I said simply. The pandemic showed us all how vulnerable single-industry portfolios can be. Luxury hospitality is starting to rebound, and the Grand Metropolitan has unique advantages in its location and established clientele. Marcus studied me with the shrewd eyes that had made him millions. And this sudden interest has nothing to do with personal reasons? I've known you for 7 years, James. You're not an impulsive man. I held his gaze steadily. I've been researching this for longer than you might think. And yes, I have a personal connection to the property. Elise and I have stayed there several times. I know its quality firsthand. The lie slid out easily, wrapped in just enough truth. Marcus nodded slowly. Send me the prospectus. I'll look it over. But James, he paused, his expression softening slightly. Hotel ownership is as much about passion as profit. Make sure you know why you're really doing this. I smiled tightly. I know exactly why I'm doing this. Over the next month, I held similar meetings with 6 other potential investors. 4 showed genuine interest. 2 declined but referred me to others who might be interested. By the end of the month, I had tentative commitments for about 40% of the capital I would need. Meanwhile, at home, I maintained the illusion of normalcy with an almost frightening ease. Elise and I had dinner together most nights she wasn't working late. We watched our usual shows. We even had sex, mechanical and distant on my part, though she didn't seem to notice. Or if she did, she attributed it to work stress. You've been so focused lately, she said one night as we lay in bed, her head on my chest where she couldn't see my expression. Is everything okay at the firm? Just some big moves in the works, I replied, staring at the ceiling. Nothing to worry about. She propped herself up on one elbow, studying my face in the dim light from the street outside. For a moment, I wondered if she could see the coldness that had taken residence behind my eyes. You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you? She asked, her voice soft with what sounded like genuine concern. I looked at the woman I had planned to marry, the woman who was currently sleeping with her boss and lying to my face, and I smiled. Of course, no secrets between us. She seemed satisfied with that and settled back against me. I lay awake long after her breathing had deepened into sleep, wondering how someone could live with such duality. Then I remembered I was doing the same thing now, and a cold laugh nearly escaped my throat. We had become mirrors of deception, Elise and I. The difference was that her betrayal was born of selfish desire, while mine was the necessary response to it. At least that's what I told myself in the dark hours of those long nights. As weeks turned into months, my plan progressed with methodical precision. I had now secured commitments for 65% of the required capital. My background research on Theodore Westbrook revealed a man who valued legacy over maximizing profit, a weakness I could potentially exploit in negotiations. I also learned everything I could about the Grand Metropolitan itself. Built in 1928 and renovated 3 times since then, it had 212 rooms, including 26 suites, a renowned restaurant, 2 bars, and a rooftop garden that was a favorite for corporate events and wealthy weddings. Its occupancy rate averaged 82%, impressive for a property of its caliber. Its staff numbered 176, many of whom had been there for decades. But most importantly for my purposes, I learned its value beyond the balance sheet. The Grand Metropolitan wasn't just a hotel, it was an institution in the city. It was where the mayor had his monthly lunches with business leaders. It was where visiting celebrities stayed when they wanted discretion, along with luxury. It was where generations of families held their milestone celebrations. And it was where Elise met Jason Mercer every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, and occasionally for entire weekends when she was supposedly out of town. I knew this because I had continued my surveillance with a thoroughness that would have impressed intelligence agencies. I had records of her location data, text messages, and emails. I had dates and times, room numbers, and even copied receipts courtesy of a hotel employee I'd befriended during my market research. What I didn't have yet was a direct line to Theodore Westbrook. That changed on a rainy Thursday in October, nearly 4 months after I'd first seen Elise at the hotel. Mr. Westbrook is attending a charity gala at the Natural History Museum this weekend, my assistant informed me, placing an invitation on my desk. You received this because of your firm's donation last year. I picked up the heavy cream-colored cardstock, running my thumb over the embossed lettering. Is he now? That's very interesting. My assistant Lisa had been with me for 6 years and knew me well enough to recognize when I was plotting something. Should I RSVP yes? You normally skip these things. Yes, please. And see if they still have a table sponsorship available. The premium one. Lisa raised an eyebrow but nodded. I'll make the arrangements. And I assume you'll need a tuxedo pressed? Yes. And Lisa? I called as she turned to leave. No need to mention this to Elise. She has that work retreat this weekend. The work retreat that didn't exist, according to the firm's calendar I'd accessed. Of course, Lisa replied, her expression carefully neutral. Sometimes I wondered if she suspected more than she let on. That Saturday night, I found myself in a black tuxedo, sipping champagne amid dinosaur skeletons and wealthy philanthropists. I'd arrived alone, having kissed Elise goodbye that morning as she left with her overnight bag for the retreat. The tracker on her phone showed she was currently at the Grand Metropolitan, in room 1142. I forced the image from my mind and focused on the task at hand. Theodore Westbrook was easy to spot, a tall, silver-haired man with the confident posture of old money and the slightly distant gaze of someone who's seen it all. He was holding court near a massive T-Rex skeleton, a group of admirers hanging on his every word. I waited patiently, working the room until I found myself in a conversation circle that included one of Westbrook's associates. From there, it was simple enough to engineer an introduction. Theodore, you should meet James Foster, the associate said. His financial consulting firm has been making waves in the tech sector. Westbrook turned his piercing blue eyes to me, extending a hand. Foster? Don't believe I've had the pleasure. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, the handshake of a man with nothing to prove. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Westbrook. Your reputation precedes you, as does yours, apparently, he said with a small smile. Though I confess I don't keep up with the tech sector as much as I should. The conversation flowed naturally from there. I was careful not to mention hotels or real estate immediately, instead discussing the charity's work, the state of the economy, and our shared appreciation for single malt scotch. It was only after our third encounter of the evening, this time at the bar, that I casually mentioned my interest in diversifying into hospitality. Interesting choice, Westbrook said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Most people your age are going digital, not brick and mortar. I believe in tangible assets, I replied. Something you can see, touch, experience. Something that creates memories, not just returns. He gave me an appraising look. That's refreshingly old-fashioned. But hospitality isn't for the faint of heart. It's a 24/7 commitment to other people's happiness. The best investments usually require commitment, I said, meeting his gaze. And the most rewarding ones transform more than just balance sheets. A slow smile spread across his face. You know, Mr. Foster, I have a feeling we should continue this conversation in more comfortable surroundings. Are you free for lunch next week? And just like that, the door I'd been meticulously working toward for months swung open. I believe I could clear my schedule for such an opportunity, I replied, my heart racing despite my calm exterior. We set a date for Wednesday at his club, an old guard establishment where deals were still made on handshakes, and the waitstaff knew every member's preferences without asking. As I left the gala later that night, I felt the first genuine surge of adrenaline since this whole plan began. I checked my phone in the cab home. Elise was still at the hotel, room 1142, with Jason Mercer, and I had just scheduled a lunch that might lead to me owning that very building. The symmetry was so perfect it almost made me laugh out loud. Lunch with Theodore Westbrook became a weekly occurrence over the next month. Our conversations ranged from business philosophy to travel, from art to family traditions. I was careful to present myself as not just a potential buyer, but as someone who understood the legacy aspect of his properties, someone who would be a worthy steward. The Grand Metropolitan was my father's first major acquisition, Westbrook told me during our fourth lunch. He bought it in 1962 when downtown was beginning to decline. Everyone thought he was crazy. Visionaries often appear that way to contemporaries, I replied, carefully cutting into my steak. But time usually vindicates them. Westbrook nodded appreciatively. Indeed, that property has weathered economic downturns, changing travel habits, even the shift to online booking platforms. It's not just survived, it's thrived. That speaks to both the property's inherent value and your management, I said. Not everything can be replaced by an app or a new trend. My thoughts exactly. He studied me for a moment. You know, James, I've had 6 serious inquiries about the Grand Metropolitan in the past year. Corporate hotel groups mostly. Foreign investors looking for American trophy properties. I kept my expression neutral despite my racing heart. And yet it remains in the Westbrook portfolio. None of them understood what they would be buying, he said simply. They saw square footage and occupancy rates, revenue streams and cost-cutting opportunities. He shook his head. They didn't see the soul of the place. I set down my fork and looked him directly in the eyes. And if someone did understand that, would you consider their offer? The air between us changed, the pretense of casual lunches falling away. Westbrook leaned back in his chair, his gaze assessing. That would depend on the someone, he said finally, and the offer. I nodded, understanding what wasn't being said. He wanted to know my intentions before we moved to numbers. I believe some properties deserve owners who value their history while guiding their future. The Grand Metropolitan isn't just a hotel, it's a landmark of this city's identity. Any changes should enhance that legacy, not diminish it. Westbrook's expression remained impassive, but I could see approval in his eyes. That's a promising perspective. But talk is cheap in business, as I'm sure you know, which is why I'd structure any potential deal to include legacy protections, I said, laying out the card I'd been holding back. Long-term retention of key staff, preservation of architectural elements, continuation of community traditions like the holiday light ceremony and the Veterans Appreciation Breakfast. I'd researched these details meticulously, knowing they would matter to him more than an extra million in the offer. His eyebrows raised slightly, the most surprise he'd shown in our acquaintance. You've done your homework. I believe in informed decisions, I replied. For investments of this magnitude, anything less would be irresponsible. Westbrook signaled for the check, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Well then, perhaps it's time we had a more formal discussion about what an offer might look like. My office next Tuesday? Bring your team if you wish. I nodded, maintaining my composed exterior while my mind raced ahead. Tuesday, the same day Elise and Jason typically met at the hotel for their afternoon rendezvous. The coincidence felt like validation. Tuesday would be perfect, I said, shaking his hand firmly. And Mr. Westbrook, thank you for considering me. I understand the responsibility that comes with a property like the Grand Metropolitan. Call me Theodore, he replied. And thank you for appreciating that it's not just a business decision. As I walked out of the club into the bright afternoon sunlight, I allowed myself a moment of genuine anticipation. The plan was working. After months of careful maneuvering, I was on the verge of the first major step toward my ultimate goal. My phone buzzed with a text from Elise. Working late tonight. Don't wait up for dinner. So, I stared at the message, the familiar mix of anger and cold determination washing over me. I typed back, no problem. I have some work to catch up on too. Then I put my phone away and hailed a cab to my office. I had a hotel to buy and a betrayal to avenge. Everything else could wait. The meeting with Westbrook's team was scheduled for 10 a.m. on Tuesday. I arrived with my financial advisor and an attorney who specialized in commercial real estate, both discreetly briefed on the legitimate aspects of my interest in the property. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that my desire to own the Grand Metropolitan had nothing to do with investment diversification and everything to do with the woman who was planning to meet her lover there at 2 p.m. that same day. Theodore greeted us in the wood-paneled conference room of Westbrook Hospitality's headquarters. Introductions were made, pleasantries exchanged, and then we got down to business. I've had my team prepare a complete prospectus, Theodore said, sliding elegant leather folios across the table to each of us. You'll find the usual financial statements, occupancy trends, capital improvements schedule, and staff retention rates. What you won't find in there is the property's true value. That can't be quantified in spreadsheets. I opened the folio, scanning the first page with its detailed overview of the hotel's history and current position in the market. I understand completely. Some things can only be felt, not calculated. Theodore nodded approvingly before turning to his CFO. Martin, why don't you walk us through the numbers? For the next hour, we delved into the financial realities of the Grand Metropolitan. The hotel was profitable, impressively so for a property of its age and size, but required ongoing investment to maintain its 5-star status. The asking price was steep but fair, given the property's performance and reputation. My financial advisor asked pointed questions about operating costs and revenue projections. My attorney inquired about easements, historic preservation requirements, and outstanding contracts with vendors and staff. I remained mostly quiet, absorbing the information while occasionally steering the conversation back to the hotel's legacy aspects rather than pure profit metrics. Finally, after all the technical details had been covered, Theodore dismissed his team with a polite but firm, "Give us the room, please." Once we were alone, he turned to me with an appraising look. "Now, James, let's talk about what's not in the prospectus. Your real interest in my hotel." My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean. I've been in business for over 40 years, he said, leaning back in his chair. In that time, I've developed a certain sense about people. You're not a hotelier. You have no experience in hospitality. Yet here you are, prepared to make a 9-figure investment in a single property rather than a diversified portfolio." He steepled his fingers. "So I have to ask myself why?" I had prepared for this question, of course. I had a perfectly reasonable explanation about portfolio diversification and passion projects. But sitting across from Theodore Westbrook, with his penetrating gaze and decades of business intuition, I made a calculated decision to offer something closer to the truth. "You're right. I'm not a hotelier by training," I admitted. "But the Grand Metropolitan is special to me. It represents something—" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Something I need to reclaim." Theodore watched me silently, waiting for more. "I've experienced significant moments of my life in that building," I continued. "Not all of them positive. Owning it would be both a business decision and a personal one." "A personal reckoning of sorts?" Theodore asked quietly. I met his gaze directly. "You could say that." He studied me for a long moment before a small smile crossed his face. "You know, my father bought the Metropolitan after my mother left him for his business partner. Their affair had been conducted largely in Suite 1617. He shook his head at my surprised expression. "Oh yes, business is often personal, despite what they teach in MBA programs." I felt a sudden kinship with this man I'd been carefully manipulating for months. "Did it help? Owning the place?" "In ways I didn't expect," he said thoughtfully. "Not because of any grand gesture of reclamation, but because it taught me that buildings outlast the dramas that unfold within them. They're witnesses, not participants." He leaned forward. "Whatever you're hoping to accomplish by owning the Metropolitan, James, remember that a hotel is ultimately about providing sanctuary, even to people you might not believe deserve it." The wisdom of his words hit uncomfortably close to my motivations, but I nodded as if accepting sage advice rather than a warning. "I'll keep that in mind. But I still want to move forward with an offer." Theodore nodded slowly. "I thought you might. I've instructed my team to be transparent with yours about the details. But I have one non-negotiable condition, which is I remain as a consultant for the first year of transition," he said, "with veto power over any staff terminations or major operational changes. After that, it's yours to run as you see fit." This was unexpected but not problematic for my plans. Having Theodore involved might actually lend credibility to the ownership change. "That seems reasonable," I agreed. Good. He stood, extending his hand. "Have your team prepare an offer. If the numbers work and your financing is solid, I suspect we'll be able to come to terms." As we shook hands, I felt the first real step toward my revenge solidify. I look forward to it. Theodore walked me to the elevator, making small talk about an upcoming restoration project at the hotel. As the doors were closing, he held them with his hand and fixed me with a serious look. "Whatever ghost you're trying to exorcise by buying my hotel, James, I hope you find peace with it." And then he released the doors, leaving me to descend alone with my thoughts. It was 1:43 p.m. when I left the Westbrook offices. According to the tracking app, Elise had just arrived at the Grand Metropolitan. I stood on the sidewalk looking in the direction of the hotel, just 15 blocks away. In room 1142, my girlfriend was meeting her lover, unaware that I was in the process of buying the very walls around them. The symmetry was so perfect it almost felt scripted. I pulled out my phone and texted Elise, "Hope your meeting goes well. Thinking of you." Her reply came quickly. "Thanks, babe. Should be done by 5. Dinner tonight?" I stared at her message, marveling at how easily the lies came to her. "Sure," I typed back. "I'll cook." Then I put my phone away and hailed a cab to my office. I had an offer to prepare and a future to reclaim, one calculated step at a time. The due diligence process for purchasing the Grand Metropolitan took nearly 3 months. During that time, my relationship with Elise continued its strange dual existence, outwardly normal while secretly crumbling. She had no idea I knew about her affair, and I maintained the deception with a skill that sometimes frightened me. We celebrated her birthday at an expensive restaurant. We spent Christmas with her family in Connecticut, smiling for photos and exchanging thoughtful gifts. We even discussed taking a summer vacation together, knowing full well we wouldn't still be together by then, at least not in any real sense. Meanwhile, I met with bankers, investors, and various consultants. The purchase was complex, involving not just the building itself, but its operations, staff contracts, vendor relationships, and reservation systems. My life became a blur of meetings, document reviews, and late nights studying hotel management. Through it all, I maintained my surveillance of Elise's activities with cold precision. Their pattern was consistent: Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at the hotel, occasional weekends disguised as work trips, or visits to her fictitious friend Megan in Chicago. I documented everything, building a comprehensive record of her betrayal while never letting on that I suspected anything. In late February, the final contracts were prepared. The purchase price had been negotiated to $97.3 million, slightly below the initial asking price, but with the legacy protections Theodore had insisted upon. My investor group was solid, my financing secure. All that remained was the closing, scheduled for March 15th. The night before the closing, Elise and I had dinner at home. She was distracted, checking her phone frequently. Something about a big client presentation. The next day, I poured her favorite wine and asked about her work. While inside, I counted down the hours until I would own the building where she conducted her affair. "You seem different lately," she said suddenly, looking up from her pasta. "More? I don't know. Intense?" I raised an eyebrow. "Do I?" "Yeah. Like you're somewhere else, even when you're here." She reached across the table to touch my hand. "Is everything okay? The firm?" I turned my palm up to hold her hand, marveling at how genuine her concern seemed. How was it possible to be so duplicitous and so sincere at the same time? "Actually, I've been working on something big," I said, deciding to offer a version of the truth. "A major acquisition that's closing tomorrow." Her eyes widened with interest. "Really? That's exciting. Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to jinx it," I said, the lie coming easily now. "And I've been so focused on making it happen that I haven't had much mental space for anything else. I'm sorry if I've been distant." "Don't apologize," she said, squeezing my hand. "I'm proud of you. Whatever it is, I'm sure it's amazing." The irony of her pride was almost too much to bear. "Thank you. I managed. It means a lot to hear you say that." Later, as we prepared for bed, she wrapped her arms around me from behind as I brushed my teeth. "So after tomorrow's closing, will I get my boyfriend back?" she asked, her reflection smiling at me in the bathroom mirror. I met her eyes in the glass, seeing not the woman I had loved, but the one who had betrayed that love so completely. "Things will definitely change after tomorrow," I said, my words carrying a weight she couldn't possibly understand. "That's a promise." She kissed my shoulder and went to bed, while I stayed up late, ostensibly reviewing documents, but actually finalizing my plans for what would happen after I became the owner of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. Morning came quickly. I dressed carefully in my best suit, kissed Elise goodbye as she headed to her client presentation, actually her regular Thursday meeting with Jason, and drove downtown to the offices of Preston and Whitmore, the law firm handling the closing. The next 3 hours were a blur of signatures, handshakes, and legally binding commitments. Theodore Westbrook was present, of course, watching with a mix of melancholy and approval as ownership of his family's flagship property transferred to me. When the final document was signed, he handed me a small wooden box. "The master key," he explained as I opened it to find an ornate brass key. "It doesn't actually open anything anymore. We've been on electronic locks since the 90s, but it's been passed down since my father's time. A symbol of stewardship." I lifted the heavy key, feeling its weight and history. "Thank you. I'll honor what it represents." Theodore nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I believe you will." He checked his watch. "Well, I'm expected at the hotel for a staff announcement at 2. Care to join me? Your first official appearance as owner?" I smiled, thinking of Elise, who, according to my tracking app, had arrived at the hotel 30 minutes ago. Room 1142, as usual. I wouldn't miss it. We rode to the hotel in Theodore's town car, discussing transition plans and his role as consultant for the coming year. All the while, I maintained my facade of calm business owner, while inside I vibrated with anticipation. After months of planning and waiting, the moment was finally approaching. The Grand Metropolitan's lobby was as impressive as ever, with its soaring ceilings, marble floors, and discreetly efficient staff. As we entered, I felt a surge of possessiveness. This was mine now. Every crystal chandelier, every polished surface, every room, including room 1142, where my girlfriend was currently with her lover. The staff had gathered in the main ballroom, arranged in a semicircle facing a small podium. There must have been over 100 people present, from the distinguished hotel manager to housekeepers in their uniforms, all waiting to learn about their new employer. Theodore took the podium first, his commanding presence immediately silencing the murmurs in the room. For 60 years, the Grand Metropolitan has been part of the Westbrook family. He began, his voice carrying effortlessly. My father acquired this property when I was just a boy, and I quite literally grew up in these hallways. Many of you have been with us for decades yourselves, and I want to thank you for your dedication to maintaining the standards that make this hotel special. He paused, his gaze sweeping the assembled staff. Change is inevitable in business as in life. Today marks a significant change for the Metropolitan, but I want to assure you that this transition has been carefully considered. The new owner understands the legacy he is inheriting and the responsibility that comes with it. Theodore gestured for me to join him. As I stepped up to the podium, I felt a moment of clarity amidst the emotional turbulence of the past months. This was about more than a lease now. It was about becoming someone new, someone who took control of situations rather than being controlled by them. Thank you, Theodore, I said, looking out at the sea of curious faces. My name is James Foster, and as of approximately, I checked my watch, 47 minutes ago, I am the new owner of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. A murmur ran through the crowd, some curious, some concerned. I raised a hand to quiet them. I want to begin by making a promise. The Grand Metropolitan's commitment to excellence will not change under my ownership. Every staff position is secure. Your benefits remain the same. The traditions and standards that have made this hotel legendary will continue. The tension in the room visibly eased, shoulders relaxing, and expressions softening. What will change is our vision for the future. I continued. I believe the Metropolitan can enhance its position as not just the best hotel in this city, but one of the finest in the country. That will require investment, innovation, and the expertise of every person in this room. I paused, scanning the faces before me, wondering if any of them had served Elise and Jason during their trysts, wondering if they'd noticed the patterns, the same room, the midweek afternoons. I look forward to getting to know each department and understanding your perspectives on how we can improve. For now, please continue your excellent work and know that I am honored to be part of the Metropolitan's next chapter. The staff applauded politely, still uncertain about this stranger who now controlled their livelihoods but relieved by the assurances I'd offered. As Theodore and I stepped away from the podium, the hotel manager began assigning department heads to return to their posts while others remained for a reception. Well said, Theodore murmured as we moved toward the refreshment table. Short, clear, reassuring. Exactly what they needed to hear. I nodded, checking my phone discreetly. Elise was still in room 1142. It was 2:37 p.m. Theodore, would you mind if I took a quick tour of the property? Now that it's official, I'd like to walk through as owner. Of course, he said, waving a hand. Richard can show you around. Actually, I'd prefer to explore on my own for now. I interrupted smoothly, just to absorb it all. We can do a formal tour with the management team tomorrow. Theodore studied me for a moment, something knowing in his gaze. As you wish. It's your hotel now. I thanked him and slipped away from the reception, heading for the elevator banks. My heart pounded as I stepped inside and pressed the button for the 11th floor. The doors closed and I watched the numbers climb. 2, 3 dots, 4 dots. What was I doing? Was I really going to confront them? Part of my plan had always been to reveal my knowledge at the perfect moment, but I hadn't decided exactly when or how. Now, riding up to the floor where Elise was betraying me at this very moment, I realized I was acting on impulse rather than careful strategy. 8, 9, 10. I took a deep breath. No, this wasn't the right time. The full impact of my revenge required patience, required Elise to understand not just that I knew, but what I had done because of what she had done. Confronting her now in the hotel room with Jason would be dramatic but ultimately unsatisfying. The elevator dinged as it reached the 11th floor. The doors opened to a hushed, carpeted hallway with subdued lighting and elegant sconces between each door. I stepped out, then paused, unsure. Room 1142 would be to the right, about halfway down the hall. Behind that door, Elise, the woman I had loved, had planned a future with, was with another man. All I had to do was walk down the hallway, use my new master access card, and I could catch them in the act. But that wasn't the plan. That wasn't worthy of the betrayal. Instead, I turned left and walked the opposite direction, finding a service stairwell and descending to the 9th floor. where the hotel's administrative offices were located. I needed to meet with the management team anyway, to begin implementing the first phase of my actual plan. As I walked into the office suite, the hotel manager looked up in surprise. "Mr. Ruern, Foster, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow's meeting." I smiled, pushing thoughts of Elise aside and focusing on the business at hand. I thought I'd get a head start. There are some operational changes I'd like to discuss implementing immediately. "Of course, sir. Sir. What did you have in mind?" I sat down across from his desk, the weight of the brass key in my pocket reminding me of Theodore's words about stewardship and sanctuary. "Let's start with our client record system. I'm particularly interested in our repeat guests and their preferences." By the time I left the hotel 3 hours later, I had set in motion the groundwork for my plan while never once approaching room 1142. As my car pulled away from the front entrance, I checked my phone one last time. Elise had left the hotel 40 minutes earlier. She'd be home soon, unaware that her lover's hideaway now belonged to her boyfriend. I smiled as the hotel receded in my rearview mirror. Patience had always been one of my strengths, and revenge, like the finest hospitality, was all about timing, presentation, and attention to detail. The next month passed in a whirlwind of activity as I balanced running my consulting firm, taking an active role in hotel operations, and maintaining my relationship facade with Elise. I strategically scheduled key hotel meetings for Tuesdays and Thursdays when I knew she would be there with Jason, though I never revealed my presence or knowledge. Instead, I focused on learning everything about the hotel's operations while implementing subtle changes. I had the hotel's IT system updated, giving me direct access to the reservation database, including records of past stays. I reviewed staffing on each floor, memorizing names and building relationships. I studied the security systems, camera placements, and access protocols, all while collecting more evidence of Elise's betrayal. The patterns continued: same days, same room, same lies about work commitments or client meetings. At home, our relationship took on an almost theatrical quality. We went through the motions of couplehood, sharing meals, watching movies, occasionally having sex that left me feeling hollow afterward. I became an expert at pretending nothing was wrong while planning the moment when I would finally reveal everything. As owner of the Grand Metropolitan, I made a point of being visible but not micromanaging. I held weekly meetings with department heads, attended staff recognition events, and authorized renovations that had been deferred under previous ownership. The employees gradually accepted me, particularly after I approved an overdue increase in the staff benefits package. I was especially careful with the front desk and housekeeping staff assigned to the 11th floor. Through casual conversation, I learned that room 1142 was often requested by a regular business client who prefers that specific view. The reservation was always made under Jason Mercer's name, though the staff had noticed he was frequently accompanied by a pretty brunette. In mid-April, approximately 1 month after taking ownership, I decided it was time for the next phase of my plan. I invited Theodore Westbrook to lunch at the hotel's restaurant to discuss the transition and some proposed renovations. "The hotel seems to be running smoothly under your ownership," Theodore observed as we were served our entrees. "The staff speaks highly of you." "I appreciate that," I replied. "They're an exceptional team. I've been impressed with their professionalism and discretion." Theodore nodded, studying me over his glasses. "And have you found what you were looking for when you bought this place? The personal resolution you hinted at?" I set down my fork, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm working on it. Some situations require careful handling." "Indeed they do." He took a sip of water. "I assume this has something to do with room 1142? The question caught me completely off guard. I managed to keep my expression neutral, but my pulse quickened. "I'll tell you what makes you say that?" Theodore's eyes crinkled slightly. "I told you I developed a sense about people over 40 years in this business. I also developed a habit of reviewing reservation patterns. Room 1142 has been consistently booked by the same client on the same days each week for nearly 8 months. And you've been asking subtle questions about that room and its occupants since you took ownership. I should have known better than to underestimate his attention to detail. You're very observant. It's my hotel." "Was my hotel," he corrected himself with a small smile. "The point is, whatever you're planning regarding that room and its occupants, just remember what I said about hotels being sanctuaries. Even for people who don't deserve sanctuary?" I asked, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. Theodore set down his napkin. "That's not for us to judge, James. We provide the space. What happens within it is between the guests and their consciences. And if their actions hurt others, then that's between them and the people they've hurt. He fixed me with a serious look. Don't use my hotel, your hotel now, as a weapon in a personal war. It diminishes its purpose. I considered his words, understanding his concern, but unmoved from my course. I appreciate your perspective, Theodore, and I promise that whatever happens, the Metropolitan's reputation will remain untarnished. He seemed to recognize that was the most reassurance he would get from me. Very well. Now about these renovation plans for the West Wing. We moved on to business matters, but Theodore's warning lingered in my mind. Was I diminishing something by using the hotel as an instrument of revenge? Perhaps. But Elise and Jason had diminished something sacred first. Trust, commitment, the future we'd planned. The symmetry of using their secret meeting place as the stage for consequences seemed not just appropriate, but necessary. After lunch, I walked Theodore to the lobby, where we parted with handshakes and promises to meet again soon. As he left through the revolving doors, I checked my watch. Thursday, 2:15 p.m. According to the reservation system I checked that morning, Jason Mercer was currently checked into room 1142. I walked to the front desk, where the manager on duty straightened immediately upon seeing me approach. Mr. Foster, good afternoon. Is there something I can help you with? Yes, Rebecca, I said, keeping my voice casual. I'd like to implement a new protocol for guest privacy. Effective immediately, any guest requesting a specific room must provide a reason for the request, which will be noted in their profile. If the same room is requested multiple times, a secondary approval should be obtained from management. Rebecca looked slightly confused but nodded. Of course, sir. May I ask what prompted this change? Just ensuring our room allocation is optimized for all guests, I said smoothly. Some people develop habits that might prevent others from experiencing different parts of the property. This way, we can better track preferences while maintaining flexibility. I understand. I'll update the protocol and inform the staff. Thank you. I paused, then added, also, please flag room 1142 for maintenance review next week. I noticed some issues with the ventilation system that should be addressed. Yes, sir. Should I block it from reservations during that time? Please do. Block it from Tuesday through Thursday, the days Jason typically booked it. As I walked away from the desk, I felt a small thrill of satisfaction. The first tangible step in my plan, disrupting their routine without revealing my knowledge. A subtle power move that neither would recognize as such. That evening, Elise came home late, her hair slightly damp as if she'd recently showered. I knew she'd been at the hotel with Jason until an hour earlier. Sorry I'm late, she said, kissing my cheek. Client meeting ran over. Then I had to stop by the gym to clear my head. The lie was so effortless it almost impressed me. No problem. I made pasta if you're hungry. You're the best, she said, setting down her bag and kicking off her shoes. How was your day? I thought about my lunch with Theodore, about flagging room 1142 for maintenance, about watching the security feed as she and Jason had entered the hotel separately, but within minutes of each other. Productive, I said, serving her a plate of pasta. Very productive. We ate dinner and talked about inconsequential things. A movie she wanted to see, a potential client my firm was courting, weekend plans with friends. All while I thought about the next steps in my carefully orchestrated plan. Next week, when Jason tried to book room 1142, he would be told it was unavailable. A small inconvenience that would force them to adjust their routine. The following week, another issue would arise, and the week after that, something else. Each disruption building toward the moment when I would finally reveal not just that I knew about their affair, but what I had done because of it. As Elise chatted about her client meeting, I smiled and nodded in all the right places, playing the role of attentive boyfriend. While inside, I felt nothing but cold anticipation. The Grand Metropolitan was mine now, and soon Elise would understand exactly what that meant. The disruptive phase of my plan proceeded smoothly over the next 3 weeks. First, room 1142 was under maintenance during their usual meeting days. When Jason attempted to book a different room, the reservation system mysteriously glitched, forcing him to make arrangements by phone, where I had instructed staff to offer only rooms on lower floors near the elevators with higher foot traffic. The following week, I implemented a loyal guest recognition program that required front desk staff to personally greet repeat visitors by name and inquire about their stay, removing the anonymity that had facilitated their affair. I watched from my office via security cameras as Jason visibly stiffened when greeted with, "Welcome back, Mr. Mercer. Will Mrs. Sawyer Chambers be joining you again today?" The third week, I had the hotel's IT team update the Wi-Fi system, requiring all guests to register with their professional email addresses for network access. A small inconvenience for most guests, but a significant risk for two people conducting an affair they wanted to keep secret. Throughout this time, I maintained my dual life with disturbing ease. At the hotel, I was the engaged new owner, implementing reasonable operational improvements. At home, I was the busy but loving boyfriend, working long hours but always making time for Elise. The strain of the deceptions sometimes exhausted me, but the closer I got to my endgame, the more energy I found to sustain it. Elise began to show signs of stress, though she attributed it to work pressure. She was more irritable, checked her phone constantly, and twice canceled our dinner plans at the last minute. I knew from my surveillance that these cancellations coincided with urgent meetings with Jason, likely discussing their increasingly complicated hotel rendezvous. By early May, I was ready for the next phase. It was time to make Jason Mercer uncomfortable, not just at the Grand Metropolitan, but in his relationship with Elise. On a Monday morning, I sent a handwritten note on the hotel's premium stationery to Jason's office. Dear Mr. Mercer, as part of our elite guest recognition program, we would like to invite you to a complimentary dinner at our award-winning restaurant, Oriole. As one of our most valued repeat guests, we appreciate your continued loyalty to the Grand Metropolitan. Please contact me directly regarding your preferred date and time. Sincerely, James Foster, owner, the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. I included my business card with my direct number. The note was perfectly professional on its surface. Nothing that would raise eyebrows if seen by his assistant or colleagues. But for Jason, it would raise an uncomfortable question. Why would the hotel owner personally reach out to him? He called later that afternoon, his voice carefully controlled. Mr. Foster, this is Jason Mercer returning your invitation. It was unexpected. Mr. Mercer, thank you for calling. I replied smoothly. The Metropolitan values its relationship with regular guests. I've noticed your frequent stays and wanted to personally ensure your experiences have been satisfactory. A pause on the line. They've been fine, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline the dinner. My schedule is quite full at the moment. I understand completely, I said. Perhaps another time. Though I must say, I was hoping to discuss some of our upcoming changes that might affect your usual arrangements. Another pause, longer this time. What sort of changes? Nothing dramatic, just some adjustments to our reservation systems, room availability, and our new guest photography policy for security purposes. None of these policies existed or were planned, but the implication was clear enough. I see, he said, tension evident in his voice. Well, if there's something specific that would affect my stays, perhaps you could let me know directly. Of course, though these things are always better discussed in person. If dinner doesn't work, perhaps we could meet briefly during your next stay? According to our records, you typically visit on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The silence that followed told me my message had landed exactly as intended. I'll have to check my calendar, he finally said. Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Foster. My pleasure, Mr. Mercer. I look forward to meeting you properly. After all, I like to know who's enjoying the amenities of my hotel on a regular basis. After he hung up, I sat back in my chair, allowing myself a moment of satisfaction. The seed was planted. Jason now knew that his affair wasn't as discreet as he'd thought, that the owner of the hotel was aware of his patterns, if not necessarily the nature of his visits. The next step was to create distance between him and Elise. That evening, I brought home an elegant gift box with the Grand Metropolitan's logo embossed in gold. What's this? Elise asked as I set it on the kitchen counter. Just a token for clients, I said casually. The hotel is launching a new loyalty program, and we're sending these to top corporate accounts. She nodded, only half interested as she checked her phone, likely for messages from Jason, who would be in a state of paranoia after my call. Actually, I continued, I think your firm works with some of our regular guests. Does the name Mercer sound familiar? Jason Mercer? Elise's head snapped up, her expression carefully controlled but her eyes suddenly alert. Mercer? My boss is Jason Mercer. Why? I maintained an expression of mild interest. Really? What a coincidence. He's one of our most frequent guests. Stays in the same room nearly every week. Is that unusual? She asked, her voice just slightly higher than normal. Not at all. Many business travelers prefer consistency. I opened the refrigerator, acting casual. I just thought it was an interesting connection. Small world. Very small. She agreed, her eyes now fixed on her phone screen. I need to make a quick work call. Back in a minute. She hurried to our bedroom, closing the door behind her. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know she was warning Jason. Warning him that her boyfriend now owned the hotel they used for their affair, and that I had specifically mentioned his name. The next day was Tuesday, their usual meeting day. According to my access to the reservation system, Jason had canceled his standing booking. The following Thursday, no reservation either. The disruption was working. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued my psychological campaign. I mentioned the Grand Metropolitan's operations frequently at home, talking about our business clients and security protocols. I left hotel-branded items around our apartment, notepads, pens, even bathrobes for product testing. I invited Elise to join me for a tour of the property, which she declined with poorly disguised panic. Meanwhile, their affair continued, but their patterns changed. Instead of the Metropolitan, they began meeting at a small boutique hotel across town, the Windermere. I knew this because I still had the tracking app on Elise's phone, though I no longer needed it. Their movements had become predictable in their desperate attempt to be unpredictable. By early June, the strain was showing clearly in Elise. She lost weight, had trouble sleeping, and was constantly checking her phone. Several times I caught her staring at me with an unreadable expression, perhaps trying to determine if I knew or if the connections I'd made were truly coincidental. It was time for the final phase. I arranged a weekend business trip to Chicago, telling Elise I needed to meet with potential investors. In reality, I checked into the Metropolitan and used the time to prepare for the endgame. I reviewed all the evidence I'd gathered over the past 8 months. Location data, text messages, hotel records. I confirmed that room 1142 would be available the following Tuesday and instructed the reservations manager to accept a booking from Jason Mercer if it came through, despite any other protocols. Then I sent Jason an email from my personal account rather than the hotel's. Mr. Mercer, I believe we have a mutual acquaintance in Elise Chambers. As her longtime partner and as the owner of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, I think it's time we discussed your regular use of room 1142. I'm available at your convenience. G.E. or James Foster, Director. Unavoidable. The pretense of ignorance finally dropped. His response came within an hour, not to my email, but via phone call. He sounded both defensive and afraid. Foster, what exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Jason, I replied calmly. I'm stating facts. You've been having an affair with my girlfriend for approximately 8 months. You typically meet at my hotel on Tuesdays and Thursdays, usually in room 1142, though recently you've switched to the Windermere, a sharp intake of breath. Don't insult both of us by denying it, I interrupted. I have every text message, every location ping, every hotel record. What I don't have is an understanding of how you plan to proceed now that you know that I know. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, "What do you want? Money?" I laughed, genuinely amused by the suggestion. I just bought a $100 million hotel, Jason. I don't need your money. Then what? You want to fight? You want me to stay away from her? Actually, no. I want you to meet me at the Metropolitan on Tuesday. Your usual time. Room 1142 will be available. His confusion was palpable. You want me to continue the affair? I don't understand. I don't need you to understand. I just need you to be there. With or without Elise, that's your choice. But if you value your career and reputation, you'll come alone. Is that a threat? It's an invitation, I replied, to finally be honest about what's been happening in my hotel, in my relationship, and in your life. After another long pause, he said, I'll be there, but I'm not promising anything beyond showing up. That's all I ask, I said and ended the call. Next, I sent a text to Elise. Need to talk about something important when I get back from Chicago. Nothing bad, just a decision I need your input on. Love you. Her reply was immediate and wary. Everything okay? Everything's fine, I assured her. Just want to discuss a potential opportunity at the hotel. See you Sunday night. Then I sat back and waited. I had set the stage for the final confrontation. Jason would be in room 1142 on Tuesday. Whether Elise joined him or not remained to be seen, but either way, my months of planning were about to culminate. I spent the rest of the weekend reviewing hotel operations and finalizing the documents I would need for Tuesday. By the time I flew home Sunday evening, every detail was in place. Elise was waiting when I arrived, her attempt at casual normalcy betrayed by the tension in her shoulders and the too bright quality of her smile. How was Chicago? She asked, helping me with my bag. Productive, I said, kissing her cheek. How was your weekend? Quiet. Just caught up on some work and watched that series we started. Another lie, she'd spent Saturday afternoon at the Windermere with Jason, likely discussing my email to him. We fell into our familiar domestic routine. Dinner, casual conversation about safe topics, television before bed. On the surface, nothing had changed. But underneath ran currents of tension and anticipation. The countdown to Tuesday had begun. Monday passed in a blur of meetings and preparations. I left work early and brought home flowers for Elise. Roses, her favorite. A final kindness before the reckoning. "What's the occasion?" she asked, clearly surprised. "Do I need an occasion to appreciate you?" I replied, kissing her forehead. The gesture felt hollow, mechanical, but she didn't seem to notice. "You mentioned wanting to talk about something?" she prompted as we ate dinner. "Yes, but let's discuss it tomorrow," I said. "I have everything prepared for then." She nodded, relief flashing briefly across her face. She thought she had another day to prepare whatever response she and Jason had concocted. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, reviewing my plan one final time. 8 months of deception, hers and then mine. 8 months of evidence gathering, of careful maneuvering, of aligning the pieces for maximum impact. Tomorrow it would all culminate in room 1142 of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. The hotel I had bought because of her betrayal. The hotel where she would finally face the consequences of her actions. I turned to look at her sleeping form, trying to remember the love I'd once felt. But all I could see was the woman who had destroyed our future for hotel room trysts and the thrill of deception. Tomorrow that woman would understand exactly who she had betrayed and what it had cost her. Morning arrived with a strange sense of calm. I dressed carefully in one of my best suits, had breakfast with Elise, and kissed her goodbye with the usual, "Have a good day," as she left for work. Nothing in my demeanor betrayed that today was different from any other. At my office, I cleared my schedule and reviewed the final preparations with my assistant. "I'll be at the hotel most of the day. Only interrupt if it's truly urgent." "Understood," Lisa replied, studying me with curiosity. "Is everything all right? You seem..." "Everything is exactly as it should be," I assured her, gathering the documents I'd prepared over the weekend. "By this evening, a long-standing issue will finally be resolved." At 1:30 p.m., I arrived at the Metropolitan. The manager on duty greeted me warmly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Foster. Everything is arranged as you requested." "Thank you, Michael. No interruptions once our guest arrives, please." "Of course, sir. Sir." I took the elevator to the 11th floor, using my master key card to access room 1142. The room had been prepared according to my instructions. A small table with 3 chairs, a silver tray with water glasses, and a leather portfolio containing the documents I would need. I surveyed the space where Elise had betrayed me countless times over the past 8 months. The king bed with its pristine white duvet. The large windows overlooking the city. The bathroom where she had washed away evidence before returning home to me. All of it now mine. At precisely 2:15 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I straightened my tie, took a deep breath, and opened it to find Jason Mercer standing in the hallway. He was dressed in a charcoal suit, his expression a mixture of defiance and apprehension. "Foster," he said by way of greeting. "Jason, please come in." He entered cautiously, glancing around the room as if expecting a trap. When he saw the table with 3 chairs, he frowned. "Is someone else joining us?" "That depends," I replied, gesturing for him to take a seat. "Did you tell Elise about our conversation?" He hesitated before answering. "Yes. And did you tell her to meet you here today?" Another pause. "I suggested it might be best if we both heard what you have to say." I nodded, unsurprised. "Then we may have a third participant." Time will tell. Jason sat stiffly in one of the chairs while I took another, leaving the third empty between us. For a moment, we simply studied each other, the boyfriend and the lover, finally face to face in the very room where the betrayal had been consummated. "Before we begin," I said, breaking the silence, "I want to be clear about something. This meeting isn't about creating a scene or physical confrontation. I'm not here to fight you or threaten you." "Then why are we here?" Jason asked, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. I opened the leather portfolio and removed a stack of papers. "We're here to negotiate the terms of your continued use of my hotel." He blinked in confusion. "Your hotel? That's what this is about? Usage fees?" In a manner of speaking, I placed the papers between us. "These documents outline a new policy specific to you, Jason Mercer, and any companions you might bring to the Grand Metropolitan Hotel." Before I could elaborate, another knock came at the door. I stood, straightening my jacket. And here, I believe, is our third participant. I opened the door to find Elise standing there, her face pale but composed. She wore a blue dress, the same one she'd worn the day I first saw them together at the hotel bar. Whether this was coincidence or a deliberate choice, I couldn't tell. "James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this about?" "Why did you want to meet here?" I stepped aside to let her enter. "Please come in, Elise. Jason and I were just discussing some new hotel policies." Her eyes darted to Jason, who remained seated at the table, then back to me. The realization that I knew, that I had orchestrated this meeting between the three of us, visibly washed over her. Hannah, how long have you known?" she asked as the door closed behind her. 8 months, I replied calmly. "Since September 17th, when you were tagged in the background of a social media post here at the hotel, on a day you were supposedly in Sacramento." She flinched as if I'd struck her. 8 months? You've known for 8 months and said nothing? "I had plans to make," I said simply, returning to the table. "Please, sit down. Both of you should hear this." Elise slowly took the chair between Jason and me, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the table. The three of us formed a bizarre triangle of betrayal, sitting in the very room where their affair had flourished. "First," I said, looking directly at Elise, "let me confirm what I know. You and Jason began your affair approximately 10 months ago. You typically met here in room 1142 on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Occasionally, you spent weekends here under the guise of work trips or visits to fictional friends. Recently, you switched to the Windermere after I became owner of this hotel and began making connections that made you uncomfortable." Elise's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny anything. Jason stared stonily at the table. "What I don't know," I continued, "is whether either of you ever considered the consequences of your actions, not just to me, but to yourselves." "James, Elise began, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not interested in apologies or explanations right now. What's done is done. I'm here to discuss the future." I removed 2 documents from the portfolio and slid one to each of them. "These are formal notifications that, effective immediately, you are both permanently banned from the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. All future reservations are canceled, and any attempt to book rooms, dine in our restaurants, or attend events on the property will be denied." They both stared at the documents in shock. "You're banning us from the hotel?" Jason asked incredulously. "That's your big revenge plan?" "It's only part of it," I replied, removing another document from the portfolio. "This is a press release announcing that the Metropolitan will be hosting the annual Advertising Excellence Awards next month, an event your firm traditionally attends, Jason. As title sponsor, I have final approval on the guest list." His face paled as he understood the implication. "You would jeopardize my career over a personal matter?" "No," I said. "You jeopardized your career when you began sleeping with a subordinate in a hotel room paid for on your corporate card." I slid copies of his receipts across the table. "I'm simply creating consequences." Elise looked up from the ban notice, tears streaming down her face. "James, please, I know I've hurt you terribly. But this, using your ownership of the hotel like this, it's not like you." "You're right," I agreed. "The James you knew wouldn't have done this. But the James you knew also wouldn't have spent 8 months tracking your betrayal while planning an elaborate revenge. People change when they discover their futures are built on lies." I turned to Jason. "You're not banned from the awards ceremony, by the way. That would be petty and might reflect poorly on the hotel. You're welcome to attend, just not to stay here before or after." He glared at me. "You think this makes you the bigger man? Buying a hotel to ban your girlfriend?" "Ex-girlfriend," I corrected him. "And no, it doesn't make me the bigger man. It makes me the owner of the establishment where you conducted your affair. There's a difference." I returned my attention to Elise, who was still staring at the ban notice through her tears. "Your things will be packed and moved to a storage facility by the end of the week," I informed her. "The access code will be sent to your email. I've also taken the liberty of finding you a short-term rental apartment. The first month is paid." She looked up, confusion mixing with her distress. "You're throwing me out but helping me relocate?" "I'm ending our relationship in a way that provides closure for me," I clarified. "What happens to you beyond that is your own concern, but I don't wish you hardship or homelessness. Just distance." "This is insane," Jason muttered. "You bought an entire hotel because your girlfriend cheated?" "Who does that?" I turned to him with a cold smile. "Someone with the resources to ensure that every time you consider having another affair, you'll remember the consequences. Someone who turns betrayal into a business opportunity." I placed one final document on the table, The hotel's latest financial report showing a 12% increase in profitability under my ownership. The Metropolitan is now performing better than it has in 5 years, I said. Theodore Westbrook has asked me to consider purchasing 2 more properties in his portfolio. What began as a vehicle for my revenge has become a successful venture in its own right. I leaned forward. So while you two were destroying relationships, I was building a new business. The room fell silent as they absorbed everything. Elise wiped her tears with shaking hands while Jason stared at the band notice with clenched jaw. Is there anything else you want to say to us? Elise finally asked, her voice small. I considered the question carefully. There was so much I could say about trust, about the future we'd planned, about the months of lies and deception. But in that moment, sitting in room 1142, with the weight of revenge finally lifting from my shoulders, I found I had only one thing left to say. Yes, I replied, gathering my documents and standing. Checkout time is 11 a.m. Housekeeping appreciates your cooperation. And with that, I walked out of room 1142, leaving Elise and Jason to face the consequences of their actions. And the reality that the hotel where their affair had flourished now stood as a permanent monument to its discovery. As the door closed behind me, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Not the triumphant satisfaction I'd expected, but something more complex. Something like closure. The long game was finally over, and I had emerged not just with revenge, but with a new direction. Theodore Westbrook was waiting in the lobby when I came downstairs. He took one look at my expression and nodded knowingly. Did you find what you were looking for? He asked as I approached. I found something, I replied. Not what I expected, but something. He smiled slightly. That's usually how it works. He gestured toward the hotel restaurant. Join me for a drink? I have some thoughts about that property in Napa we discussed. I glanced back at the elevators, thinking of Elise and Jason still in room 1142, then turned to Theodore with a nod. I'd like that. I think it's time to look forward, not back. As we walked toward the bar, I felt my phone buzz with a text from Elise. I didn't read it. Whatever she had to say could wait. I had a hotel to run and a future to rebuild, one that no longer included her or the pain of her betrayal. The Grand Metropolitan had begun as my instrument of revenge. Now it would become my legacy instead. Sometimes life's detours lead to better destinations than the ones we originally planned. Sometimes betrayal, as painful as it is, forces us to build something stronger than what was broken. And sometimes buying a hotel to ban your cheating girlfriend is just the first step in becoming someone new. Someone who understands that the best revenge isn't just about getting even. It's about moving on. It's been 6 months since I walked out of room 1142, leaving Elise and Jason to contemplate the ruins of their affair and my masterfully executed revenge. 6 months of rebuilding my life without the woman I'd planned to marry. 6 months of immersing myself in the hotel business with an intensity that surprised even Theodore Westbrook, my mentor in this unexpected new chapter of my life. You're a natural, Theodore remarked one evening as we reviewed the quarterly financials for the Grand Metropolitan in the hotel's private dining room. I've known lifelong hoteliers with less instinct for this business than you've shown in half a year. I smiled, appreciating the compliment from a man whose opinion I'd come to value. I had a compelling reason to learn quickly. Ah, yes, Theodore said, his eyes twinkling with understanding. Revenge, the most expensive business school there is. We both laughed, something I found myself doing more frequently these days. The bitter edge that had defined me during those 8 months of surveillance and planning had gradually softened. Not completely. There were still moments when memories of Elise's betrayal cut through me like shards of ice, but enough that I could occasionally find humor in the absurdity of buying a $100 million hotel to ban my cheating girlfriend. Have you heard from her? Theodore asked carefully, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I nodded, taking a sip of my own scotch. She emails every few weeks. Text messages occasionally. I haven't responded. What I didn't tell Theodore was that I still read every message. Each one a data point in the emotional aftermath of our relationship's implosion. The first messages had been tearful apologies, desperate attempts to explain what she called a terrible mistake. Then came anger. How could I have watched and planned for 8 months? Wasn't that more calculating and cruel than her affair? Most recently, her messages had shifted to something more reflective, more resigned. I understand why you did it. Her last email had read, not just the revenge, but the way you did it. You always said business was about leverage and timing. I just never thought you'd apply those principles to us. I hadn't replied, but her words had lingered. She was right. I had approached my revenge like a business acquisition, methodical, strategic, leveraging assets for maximum impact. The irony wasn't lost on me. In becoming the wrong party, I had also become someone capable of cold calculation I never thought possible before her betrayal. You should consider her perspective eventually, Theodore said, interrupting my thoughts. Not for her sake, but for yours. I raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning that carrying unresolved emotions is like owning a property with a structural flaw. He set down his glass. Eventually, you have to address it or risk the whole thing coming down around you. I thought we were discussing hotel management, not my personal life, I said, deflecting with a smile. In my experience, the two are never entirely separate. Theodore gathered his papers. The Grand Metropolitan is thriving under your ownership, James. But hotels are meant to provide temporary sanctuary for guests passing through, not permanent refuge for their owners. His words hit uncomfortably close to home. In the months since the confrontation in room 1142, I had indeed made the Metropolitan my sanctuary. I spent more time in the penthouse suite than at my own apartment. I knew the staff by name, ate most meals in the restaurant, and conducted the majority of my business, both hotel and consulting firm, from the office on the mezzanine level. I'm not hiding, I protested, though the defensive note in my voice betrayed me. Aren't you? Theodore asked gently. 6 months, and from what I can tell, your life consists of work, hotel operations, and occasional dinners with me, a man nearly twice your age. I couldn't argue with his assessment. Since ending things with Elise, I had retreated into work with monastic dedication. My consulting firm continued to thrive under my leadership, and the Metropolitan's performance had exceeded all projections. But my personal life was non-existent. I declined invitations from friends, avoided dating entirely, and generally constructed a life that minimized the possibility of emotional entanglements. I'm focused, I said finally. That's different from hiding. Theodore nodded, not pushing further. Well, your focus has certainly paid off financially. The Napa property is an excellent addition to your portfolio, by the way. The board approved your offer this morning. The news should have elated me. The acquisition of the Vineyard Retreat in Napa Valley had been in negotiation for months, a logical expansion of what was quickly becoming the Foster Hospitality Group. Instead, I felt a strange hollowness at the achievement. That's excellent news, I said, mustering enthusiasm I didn't entirely feel. We should celebrate. Indeed, we should. Theodore stood, gathering his coat. But not tonight. I have a standing dinner with my daughter. He paused at the door, turning back with an uncharacteristically hesitant expression. You know, James, she's asked about you several times. Abigail is quite impressed by what she's heard. I kept my face carefully neutral. Theodore had mentioned his daughter before. Abigail Westbrook, 34, recently divorced, a successful architect specializing in historic property renovations. He'd been dropping increasingly unsubtle hints about introducing us for weeks. I'm sure she's lovely, Theodore, but you're focused. He finished, a knowing smile creasing his face. Of course, just an observation. After he left, I remained at the table, contemplating my untouched dinner and half-empty scotch glass. The dining room was nearly empty at this hour, the soft lighting creating pools of warm gold against dark wood paneling. This room, like every inch of the Metropolitan, had become more familiar to me than anywhere else in my life. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email from Elise. The subject line read simply, "Closure." My finger hovered over the delete button, my usual response to her messages. Instead, after a moment's hesitation, I opened it. James, I've respected your silence these past months, though it's been difficult. I understand why you haven't responded to my attempts to communicate. What I did was unforgivable, and your response, while extreme, was not undeserved. I'm writing to let you know that I've accepted a position with an agency in Los Angeles. I'll be leaving next week. Before I go, I'd like to return some things of yours that I still have. Books mostly, and that vintage watch that belonged to your grandfather. I won't ask to see you in person if that's not what you want. I can leave everything with the doorman at your building. But if you're willing, I would appreciate the chance to say goodbye properly. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I am genuinely sorry for the pain I caused. The affair with Jason was a terrible mistake born of my own insecurities and weaknesses, not any failing on your part. He and I ended things the day of your confrontation at the hotel, though I suspect you neither care nor are surprised by that. I hope that the Grand Metropolitan brings you the satisfaction that I failed to provide. You deserve happiness, James, even if it can no longer be with me. Elisa, I read the email twice, trying to identify the emotion it stirred in me. Not anger, that had dulled to a low, constant hum rather than the sharp stabs of before. Not sadness exactly, though there was a melancholy to the finality of her words. Perhaps it was simply recognition of an ending, of a chapter closing, of the opportunity to truly move forward. Los Angeles. She was leaving. The physical distance somehow made the emotional distance I'd been maintaining feel different, more permanent, more real. The thought of never seeing her again provoked an unexpected pang of something. Not regret exactly, not longing, but acknowledgement perhaps of what had once been. I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done in 6 months. I replied to her message. Elise, thank you for letting me know about your move. I wish you well in Los Angeles. Regarding your offer to return my belongings, I would be willing to meet briefly. Not at my apartment or yours, but somewhere neutral. Perhaps coffee at Sterling's on Thursday afternoon, if that works for you. James, short, formal, controlled, but a response nonetheless. My finger hovered over the send button for a full minute before I finally pressed it. Then I signaled for the check, left a generous tip, and took the elevator to the penthouse suite. As I moved through the elegant space that had become more home than hotel room to me, Theodore's words echoed. Hotels are meant to provide temporary sanctuary for guests passing through, not permanent refuge for their owners. Perhaps it was time to stop being a permanent guest in my own life. Sterling's was a small, upscale cafe in a neighborhood equally distant from my apartment and Elise's temporary rental. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table in the corner that offered privacy without isolation. The cafe was moderately busy for a Thursday afternoon, filled with the quiet hum of conversations and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. I ordered a black coffee and waited, my eyes occasionally drifting to the door despite my attempt at nonchalance. When Elise finally entered, I was struck by how simultaneously familiar and foreign she appeared. Her chestnut hair was shorter now, falling just below her shoulders instead of down her back. She wore a simple blue dress, not the same one from our confrontation at the hotel, but similar enough that I wondered if the choice was deliberate. She spotted me immediately, hesitating briefly before making her way to the table. She carried a small box tucked under one arm. James, she said, her voice softer than I remembered. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I stood, a reflexive courtesy, and gestured to the chair across from mine. Would you like something to drink? Just water, please. She set the box on an empty chair beside her. I don't think I could stomach coffee right now. I signaled a waiter and ordered water for Elise, then settled back into a silence that felt charged with unspoken words. She looked well, if a bit thinner. The dark circles under her eyes suggested sleep hadn't come easily for her either. You look good, she said, finally breaking the silence. The hotel business seems to agree with you. It's been an unexpected fit, I acknowledged. Theodore has been an excellent mentor. She nodded, her fingers nervously tracing patterns on the tablecloth. I saw the announcement about your acquisition in Napa. Congratulations. Thank you. I kept my tone neutral, professional, as if she were a business acquaintance rather than the woman who had shared my bed and betrayed my trust. The waiter returned with her water, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension between us. After he left, Elise took a small sip, then squared her shoulders as if gathering courage. I brought your things, she said, gesturing to the box. The books, the watch, and a few other items I thought you might want. I appreciate that. She hesitated, then reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope. I have this for you. I took the envelope, noting the thickness. What is this? The key to your apartment, she explained, and a check. My portion of the rent for the remaining months on the lease? That's unnecessary, I said, pushing the envelope back toward her. I'm doing fine financially. I know that. A flash of irritation crossed her face. It's not charity I'm offering, James. It's responsibility. I left you with an apartment you never wanted to live in alone. The least I can do is fulfill my financial obligation. I had forgotten this side of Elise. Her stubborn insistence on fairness, even when it was inconvenient for her. It was one of the qualities that had attracted me to her initially. Before the affair, I would have called it integrity. Keep it, I said. Consider it a parting gift, or funding for your fresh start in Los Angeles. Her eyes flashed. I don't want your money, especially not as some sort of severance package for our relationship. Despite myself, I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Still as stubborn as ever, I see. The tension broke slightly as she returned a small, sad smile. Some things don't change, But other things had changed, dramatically, irrevocably. We both fell silent again, acknowledging the vast distance that now existed between us. Not just the physical distance of her imminent move to Los Angeles, but the emotional chasm created by betrayal, revenge, and aftermath. Why did you do it? I asked suddenly, the question escaping before I could contain it. After 4 years, after all our plans, why Jason? Why anyone? Elise looked down at her hands, now clasped tightly around her water glass. For a moment, I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to lean forward to hear. There's no explanation that could justify what I did, she began. But if you want the truth, it wasn't about Jason specifically. It wasn't even about sex, not really. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine directly. It was about feeling seen, James. In the year before the affair started, you were so focused on the firm's expansion that our relationship became secondary, predictable. I'd tell you about a creative breakthrough at work, and you'd nod while checking your emails. I'd suggest a weekend away, and you'd say soon but never commit to a date. So this is my fault? I asked, anger flaring briefly. No. Her response was immediate, emphatic. The choice to cheat was entirely mine. The weakness was mine. The betrayal was mine. She took a shaky breath. What I'm trying to say poorly is that I felt invisible in our relationship. And then Jason started paying attention, not just to my work, but to me. He asked questions and remembered the answers. He made me feel valued and desirable at a time when I felt neither. You could have talked to me, I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. You could have told me you were unhappy. I tried, she said softly. Not directly enough, I realize now. I dropped hints, made suggestions. When that didn't work, I convinced myself that you were simply too busy to notice my unhappiness, and eventually that you didn't care enough to try. I wanted to deny her assessment, to defend myself, to point out that building a successful business required sacrifice, that I had been working toward our future. But memory after memory surfaced. Elise trying to discuss vacation plans while I reviewed quarterly projections. Elise suggesting couples therapy, framed as maintenance, rather than intervention. Elise's increasing withdrawal as I worked later and later hours. I had missed the signs. Not that it justified her betrayal, but I hadn't been as attentive as I'd believed. That still doesn't explain 8 months of lying, I said, focusing on the fact that felt most unassailable. One moment of weakness I might understand, but you maintained the affair for months, looking me in the eye day after day. Shame colored her cheeks. Once it started, I didn't know how to end it. I told myself it was temporary, that I would break it off and you would never need to know. Then temporary became regular, and with each lie, coming clean seemed more impossible. She shook her head. It sounds pathetic now. I was pathetic, weak and selfish and unworthy of your trust. Her self-flagellation offered no satisfaction. In my revenge fantasies, I had imagined her broken and remorseful, begging forgiveness I would coldly withhold. The reality, her quiet acknowledgement of her failings, her clear-eyed assessment of her weakness, left no room for righteous indignation. When did you realize I knew? I asked, changing direction. Before the hotel confrontation, I mean. I suspected something when you mentioned Jason being a hotel guest, she admitted, but I convinced myself it was coincidence. It wasn't until he told me about your email that I knew for certain, and yet you still came to the hotel that day. I had to, she said simply. I owed you that much at least, to face what I had done, to hear whatever you needed to say. I nodded, understanding that impulse. The need for resolution, for confrontation, for truth, however painful. What about Jason? I hadn't planned to ask about him, had told myself I didn't care, but the question emerged anyway. It ended that day in room 1142, she said. Not because you demanded it or because of the hotel ban, but because seeing the pain I'd caused you made it impossible to continue pretending what we were doing wasn't destructive. He got to keep his job, I observed, remembering my implied threat during the confrontation. Yes, though there were consequences. He was removed from my department. We don't interact professionally anymore. She hesitated. The Los Angeles position is actually with a competing agency. A fresh start seemed best for everyone. Silence fell between us again, but it felt different now. Less charged, more contemplative. Through the cafe window, I could see people passing on the sidewalk, going about their lives unaware of the small drama of closure playing out at our corner table. I didn't respond to your messages because I didn't know what to say. I admitted finally. Anything I might have written would have come from anger or hurt. I needed distance. I understand, she said. I didn't expect responses. I just needed you to know I was sorry, truly sorry. And now you're leaving. Yes. She glanced at her watch. My flight is Sunday morning. New job starts Monday. The finality of it struck me. After 4 years together and 6 months apart, this cafe meeting was likely the last time I would ever see Elise. Despite everything, the thought produced a dull ache of loss. Not for what we had become, but for what we had once been to each other. I hope you find what you're looking for in Los Angeles, I said, surprising myself with the sincerity of the sentiment. Thank you. She hesitated, then asked, and what about you, James? Have you found what you were looking for in the hotel business? I considered the question carefully. Had I? The revenge had been executed perfectly. The Grand Metropolitan was thriving under my ownership. The Foster Hospitality Group was expanding with the Napa acquisition. By any objective measure, I had transformed betrayal into success. I'm still figuring that out, I answered honestly. The hotels were meant to be an instrument of revenge, but they've become something more, something unexpected, like a second chance, she suggested softly. Perhaps? I glanced at my watch, suddenly needing this meeting to end while it remained civil, reflective, controlled. I should get going. I have a conference call about the Napa property. She nodded, accepting the clear signal that our time was concluding. Of course. We both stood, the awkwardness of departure hanging between us. How does one say goodbye to a person who was once the center of your world, then the focus of your rage, and now, what? A painful memory. A cautionary tale. Take care of yourself, James, she said, extending her hand formally. I looked at her offered hand, remembering all the ways we had touched over 4 years. Passionate, tender, casual, comforting. This sterile handshake seemed an inadequate conclusion to our shared history. Instead, I stepped forward and embraced her briefly, a gesture of neither forgiveness nor reconciliation, but acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of what had been lost, and what had been learned. Goodbye, Elise, I said as I stepped back. Safe travels. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Goodbye. I picked up the box of my belongings and left the cafe without looking back, feeling lighter than I had in months. Not healed, not completely, but no longer trapped in amber, preserved in the moment of betrayal's discovery. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Theodore. Dinner tonight at 7. Bringing Abigail. No excuses. We're celebrating Napa. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a response I wouldn't have considered sending yesterday. Looking forward to it. The Vineyard Retreat in Napa Valley was a stark contrast to the Grand Metropolitan, where the city hotel was all urban sophistication and polished grandeur. This property embraced rustic elegance and natural beauty. 32 Vineyard View suites were arranged around a central courtyard, with the main building housing a renowned farm-to-table restaurant, a wine tasting room, and a spa specializing in grape-based treatments. I stood on the terrace of the owner's residence, now my weekend home, watching the sun set over rows of grapevines stretching toward distant mountains. It had been 3 months since my coffee meeting with Elise, 3 months since she left for Los Angeles. In that time, I had thrown myself into the Napa acquisition with renewed energy, splitting my time between the city and wine country, gradually building a life that felt less like a reaction to betrayal and more like a choice. The architect's renderings arrived today, a voice said behind me. They're on your desk when you're ready to review them. I turned to see Abigail Westbrook leaning against the doorway, her tall frame silhouetted by the warm light from inside. Her presence here, at my Napa property, still felt surprising despite the fact that we'd been working together professionally for the past 2 months. Theodore had indeed introduced us at that celebration dinner, but any romantic notions he might have harbored for his daughter and me had yet to materialize, though not for lack of chemistry between us. Thanks, I said, turning back to the view. Join me? The sunset is spectacular tonight. She moved to stand beside me at the stone balustrade, her shoulder not quite touching mine. The light in this valley is different from anywhere else, she observed. It has a quality cinematographers would kill to capture. I smiled, appreciating her artistic perspective. As an architect specializing in historic renovations, Abigail saw spaces differently than most people. It was why I'd hired her firm to oversee the planned expansion of the Vineyard Retreat, a decision that had nothing to do with her being Theodore's daughter and everything to do with her brilliant portfolio. Have you decided about the event center proposal? She asked, her voice professional despite our informal setting. I'm leaning toward approval, I replied. Your design integrates beautifully with the existing structures, and the business case is solid. But She turned slightly, studying my profile. In the 3 months we'd worked together, she'd become adept at reading my hesitations. But I'm still concerned about maintaining the intimate feel of the property. The Metropolitan can accommodate hundreds of guests without losing its character. This place is different. Its charm lies in its exclusivity, its tranquility. She nodded thoughtfully. What if we scaled back the capacity? Limited to 80 guests instead of 120? That would allow for destination weddings and corporate retreats without overwhelming the property. That could work. I agreed, making a mental note. Revise the renderings and we'll review tomorrow. We fell into comfortable silence, watching as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. A cool breeze stirred the grapevines below, carrying the earthy scent of soil and vegetation. Dad mentioned you had coffee with your ex before she left town. Abigail said casually, breaking the silence. He seemed to think it was significant. I shot her a sideways glance. Your father has an interesting definition of confidential conversations. She laughed, a rich sound that seemed to complement the vineyard setting. In his defense, he only mentioned it because I asked why you seem different lately. Different how? Less guarded, she said after a moment's consideration. When we first met, you had this fortress around you. Professionally charming, but personally inaccessible. Her assessment was surprisingly accurate. When Theodore had first introduced us, I had been polite but distant, agreeing to the dinner primarily to humor my mentor. Abigail had been equally reserved. Recently divorced herself, she'd made it clear she wasn't looking for a relationship. Our mutual disinterest in romance had paradoxically made our professional collaboration more comfortable. The coffee meeting helped, I admitted. Not in the way most people would expect. It didn't provide some dramatic catharsis or healing moment, but it did help me contextualize what happened. Meaning? I turned to face her fully, trying to articulate something I'd been processing for months. Revenge is clarifying while you're planning it. It gives purpose to pain, direction to anger. But once executed, it leaves a vacuum. Meeting with Elise helped me realize I needed to fill that vacuum with something constructive, rather than just existing in it. Abigail nodded, her expression thoughtful. At 43, she had a quiet wisdom that never felt condescending. Her own divorce after 15 years of marriage had left her with what she once described as a healthy respect for life's ability to renovate your plans without consulting you. After my divorce, she said, I renovated my entire house, tore down walls, opened up spaces, let in more light. She smiled ruefully. My therapist had a field day with the metaphor, but it helped. Creating something new where something broken had been. Is that what you're doing with me? I asked, gesturing toward the vineyard. Helping me renovate my life after emotional demolition? I'm helping you expand a boutique hotel property. She corrected with professional precision, then softened. But if the work has other benefits, I'm glad. The last rays of sunlight disappeared, leaving us in the gentle blue of dusk. Below in the courtyard, lights began to illuminate pathways between the guest suites. From the restaurant, I could hear the murmur of diners and the occasional clink of glasses. Have dinner with me, I said impulsively. Not as a client meeting, not with your father as buffer. Just dinner. Abigail studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the fading light. James, we have a good working relationship. Are you sure you want to complicate that? No, I admitted. But I'm sure I'd like to have a conversation with you that doesn't involve building materials or occupancy rates. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Dinner, she agreed. But not tonight. I need to review those revised renderings if you want them tomorrow. Tomorrow then, I said, oddly pleased by her prioritization of work over personal matters. The restaurant here at 8? Too obvious, she countered. Everyone would be watching the owner and his architect. She thought for a moment. There's a small place in St. Helena. Excellent food, discreet service. Send me the details and I'll make a reservation. I already have a standing one, she said with a hint of challenge in her voice. Table by the fireplace, 8 o'clock. With that, she turned and walked back into the house, leaving me with the distinct impression that Abigail Westbrook was going to be far more interesting than any renovation project. Dinner with Abigail became a weekly occurrence, alternating between Napa when I was at the Vineyard Retreat and the city when I was overseeing the Metropolitan. Our conversations ranged far beyond hotel renovations and architectural specifications, revealing layers of compatibility I hadn't anticipated. She was well-read, politically engaged, and possessed a dry wit that often caught me off guard. Most refreshingly, she had no interest in being impressed by my wealth or business success. The thing about growing up with Theodore Westbrook as your father, she explained one evening over tapas in a small Spanish restaurant, Is that you become immune to the trappings of success? Dad made his first million before I was born. Money was just there, like air. That could have made you entitled. I observed. Instead, you built your own career, your own reputation. She shrugged, sipping her wine. I watched too many of my friends become professional inheritors, their only job being to manage family money and attend charity galas. It seemed like a waste of potential. Our professional relationship continued alongside our growing personal connection. The expansion plans for the Vineyard Retreat were approved, with construction set to begin in the spring. Abigail's firm had also taken on a smaller restoration project at the Metropolitan, preserving historic elements while updating infrastructure. 4 months into this undefined relationship, I found myself sitting in Theodore's office at the Westbrook corporate headquarters, ostensibly discussing the potential acquisition of a third property, a beachfront hotel in Southern California. The numbers look promising, Theodore said, reviewing the prospectus. Revenue per available room is strong, occupancy rates are above industry average, and the location is unbeatable. But the property itself needs work, I noted. Significant renovation to bring it up to the standard of the other Foster Group hotels. True, but you have an excellent architect at your disposal, Theodore replied with a knowing smile. Assuming you haven't scared her off with your personal entanglement, I set down the document I'd been reviewing, fixing my mentor with a steady gaze. If you have concerns about my professional relationship with Abigail, I'd prefer you state them directly. Theodore leaned back in his chair, studying me with amusement. No concerns about the professional relationship? You're both adults and consummate professionals. I'm more curious about the personal side of things, which is none of your business, I said firmly, though without heat. As her father, I could argue otherwise. His eyes twinkled. But I respect your privacy, both of yours. I just hope you're approaching this with clarity. Meaning? Theodore sighed, his expression turning serious. Meaning that Abigail had her heart broken quite thoroughly by her ex-husband. And you, my friend, have been on a journey of revenge and recovery that might not have fully played out yet. The observation stung, particularly because it echoed private concerns I'd been grappling with myself. Was I ready for a relationship? Had I truly moved past the betrayal? Or was my interest in Abigail simply a distraction? Another form of moving on without moving through. We're taking things slowly, I said finally, getting to know each other without expectations. Good, Theodore nodded approvingly. She deserves that. You both do. We returned to discussing the beachfront property, but Theodore's concerns lingered in my mind. That evening, as I returned to the Metropolitan, I found myself walking past room 1142, something I typically avoided doing. I paused outside the door, remembering that final confrontation with Elise and Jason. The coldness of my revenge, the shock on their faces, the strange emptiness I'd felt afterward. On impulse, I used my master key to enter the room. It was immaculate, as all rooms at the Metropolitan were, prepared for the next guest who would arrive later that evening. Fresh flowers on the desk, crisp white linens on the bed, evening turn-down service completed. I stood in the center of the space where my old life had ended and my new one had begun. Room 1142, just another luxury hotel accommodation now, stripped of its emotional significance by time and perspective. The ghosts I'd expected to encounter here were notably absent. My phone buzzed with a text from Abigail. Finished the beach hotel assessment. Available to discuss over dinner tomorrow? I smiled at the message, appreciating her blend of professional focus and personal connection. As I typed a response confirming our dinner plans, I realized something important. I was standing in room 1142, thinking about the future, not the past. With newfound certainty, I left the room, locking it behind me and continuing down the hall toward the elevators. It was time to check out of the emotional limbo I'd been occupying since Elise's betrayal. Time to stop being a permanent resident in my own revenge narrative. As the elevator doors closed, I felt something shift inside me, a final releasing of the anger that had driven me to buy this hotel in the first place. The Metropolitan was no longer a monument to betrayal. It was simply an excellent business investment, the foundation of what was becoming a successful hospitality group. I had bought a hotel to ban my cheating girlfriend, but in doing so, I had inadvertently created a new future for myself, one with unexpected directions and possibilities I couldn't have imagined during those dark months of surveillance and planning. Sometimes revenge doesn't work out quite the way you expect. Sometimes it works out better. 1 year later, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the grand reopening of the Shoreline Hotel, the newest jewel in the Foster Hospitality Group's collection of luxury properties. Applause rippled through the crowd gathered in the newly renovated lobby as I concluded my brief remarks. The space was transformed from the dated, tired venue I'd acquired 10 months earlier into a stunning coastal modern retreat. Soaring ceilings with exposed beams, a wall of windows framing the Pacific Ocean, and custom furnishings in shades of sea glass and driftwood created an atmosphere of relaxed sophistication. As guests began to circulate, exploring the renovated property and sampling offerings from the new restaurant, I found myself at the center of congratulatory conversations with local officials, industry colleagues, and investors. The Foster Hospitality Group was now firmly established with 3 distinctive properties: urban luxury at the Metropolitan, wine country elegance at the Vineyard Retreat, and now coastal relaxation at the Shoreline. You've built something remarkable in just 18 months, Theodore observed as we stood by the windows watching the sunset over the ocean. 3 properties, each distinctive, each successful. I had excellent guidance, I acknowledged, raising my champagne glass in his direction. An excellent renovation expertise, he added with a pointed glance toward Abigail, who was across the room explaining architectural details to a group of admiring guests. I followed his gaze, taking in the sight of her animated expression as she described the challenges of preserving the building's historic elements while modernizing its functionality. Her passion for her work was evident even from a distance, one of the many qualities I'd grown to appreciate deeply over our months together. Yes, I agreed simply. Excellent expertise. Theodore studied me with knowing eyes. You haven't told her yet, have you? I shook my head. Tonight, after the event. Good luck, he said, clapping me on the shoulder before moving to join a conversation with the mayor. An hour later, as the party continued in full swing, I found Abigail on the oceanfront terrace, enjoying a quiet moment away from the crowd. She leaned against the railing, the soft outdoor lighting highlighting the elegant lines of her profile against the darkening sky. Hiding from your admirers? I asked, joining her at the railing. She smiled without turning, just catching my breath. Your opening is a tremendous success. Our opening, I corrected. This renovation wouldn't exist without you. Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Foster. I certainly hope so, Ms. Westbrook. She turned to face me fully, her expression shifting to one of curiosity. You seem different tonight. More, I don't know, settled? I nodded, appreciating her perceptiveness. I am. 18 months ago, I bought the Metropolitan as an act of revenge. Tonight, reopening the Shoreline feels like an act of creation instead. Growth looks good on you, she said softly. I took a deep breath, reaching for her hand. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have shared earlier in our relationship. Her expression grew wary. That sounds ominous. It's not, I assured her quickly. It's about room 1142. At the Metropolitan? What about it? I had never told Abigail the full story of my revenge against Elise, only that we had broken up after I discovered her affair and that I had subsequently purchased the Metropolitan as a business opportunity that emerged from personal upheaval. The specific details of my elaborate scheme had remained private, a chapter I hadn't been ready to share. I didn't just buy the Metropolitan as a business investment after discovering Elise's affair, I explained. I bought it specifically because it was where she conducted her affair, in room 1142. And once I owned it, I banned her and her lover from the property. Permanently. Abigail's eyes widened slightly, but her expression remained thoughtful rather than judgmental. That's comprehensive as revenge goes. It was calculated, I admitted. Cold. I spent 8 months planning it while pretending I knew nothing about her betrayal. Why are you telling me this now? I squeezed her hand gently. Because I'm asking the Metropolitan's management to remove the ban on Elise and Jason. It's been nearly 2 years, and continuing it serves no purpose except to keep me tethered to the past. Abigail studied me for a long moment. That's a significant step. It is, I agreed. And I wanted you to know about it, about all of it, because you deserve the complete truth of who I am and how I got here. She considered this, her gaze moving past me to the celebration visible through the terrace doors, the culmination of our professional collaboration and the backdrop to our personal connection. Thank you for telling me, she said finally. Most men would have kept that particular chapter buried. I'm trying not to be most men. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. You're succeeding. She paused, then asked, what prompted this decision? About lifting the ban, I mean. I turned to look out at the dark ocean, gathering my thoughts. Partly time and perspective, partly realizing that maintaining the ban was actually keeping me connected to the betrayal, rather than free from it. I faced her again. But mostly it's because of you. Not directly, but because knowing you has helped me understand what actually matters. The hotels aren't monuments to revenge anymore. They're the foundation of a future I never expected, but now can't imagine living without. James Foster, she said with gentle amusement. That almost sounds like a declaration. It might be, I admitted, though I had planned something a bit more formal. Her expression shifted to surprise as I reached into my pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I'm not proposing, I clarified quickly. Not yet. That would be premature even for someone with my demonstrated tendency toward grand gestures. Relief mingled with curiosity in her eyes. Then what is this? I opened the box to reveal a key, not a ring resting on velvet. But not just any key. It was a replica of the brass master key Theodore had given me when I purchased the Metropolitan, symbolic of hotel ownership and stewardship. This is an invitation, I explained. The Foster Hospitality Group is establishing a charitable foundation focused on historic building preservation and community access to the arts. I'd like you to serve as its director. Abigail stared at the key, then at me, momentarily speechless. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, I corrected. Professional initially, though, with significant personal implications I hope we'll explore over time. She took the box, running her finger lightly over the ornate key. You do realize most men in your position would simply ask a woman to dinner? I did that months ago, I reminded her. This feels more consequential. It is, she agreed, closing the box carefully, which is why I'll need to think about it. The professional part? She clarified with a small smile. The personal implications are already under favorable consideration. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months, perhaps years. Take all the time you need. The foundation will wait for the right director. She slipped the box into her evening bag, then stepped closer. You know, when Dad first introduced us, I thought you were just another wealthy man playing hotelier to massage your ego. And now? Now I think you're a man who transformed an act of revenge into something meaningful. She reached up to touch my face gently. That's a rare kind of alchemy, James. Before I could respond, she leaned in and kissed me. Not our first kiss, but perhaps our most significant. A kiss that acknowledged the past while focusing firmly on the future. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with emotion and possibility. We should get back to your guests. They'll be wondering where the visionary hotelier has disappeared to. Let them wonder, I said, drawing her back into my arms. Some moments deserve privacy. As we stood together on the terrace of my newest hotel, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. From the devastating discovery in the bar of the Metropolitan to this moment of genuine happiness. From revenge to renewal, from pain to possibility. I had bought a hotel to ban my cheating girlfriend for life. Instead, I had built a new life entirely. One with greater depth, purpose, and potential than I could have imagined during those dark days of betrayal and planning. Sometimes the most elaborate revenge plans lead to unexpected destinations. And sometimes those destinations turn out to be exactly where you were meant to be all along.